me some questions just a little bit ago that are going to kind of gear towards our discussion. And then, yes, we are going to make time for questions from our friends and colleagues in the audience. So over to Stas, take it away.
Okay, Gene, thank you very much. And David and Propeller Club of LA Long Beach, thank you very much for having me. And it's always good for Propeller Clubs to work together. And I really, David and I have been talking to each other a lot, and I'm glad we finally found a venue to work together on. We have a very, there's that famous Chinese proverb, beware of living in interesting times. And I think that we're in one of those. We have a number of issues that I'd like to talk to Gene about today. And Gene, the first one is, how concerned should we be about the SSA ILWU dispute up in Seattle? And today we've been hearing that there have been some slowdowns at Tacoma, Seattle, and at Oakland. Are we in the process of moving to a worse place than we were before, Gene?
Oh, I don't know about that, Stas, but this is what happens in bargaining. These are tough issues that have to be discussed and resolved between the two parties. And we've got experts on both sides of the table. It's been 4 months now. You haven't heard too much because both sides had a real agreement to keep what's at the table there and allow the rest of us to focus on moving all this cargo that's been coming through. It gets a little more complex when people start talking out of school. I don't like reading articles where it says unnamed sources and sources. So I'm going to let the experts continue to work on this. For Los Angeles, the productivity remains the highest it's been. And that's the creed that we've had. While those folks are at the table up in San Francisco bargaining, that the rest of us are going to move this cargo. And we sure have shown that. The average exchange for a vessel down here, how much we unload and load per every average vessel call, is still the best in the business today. It's nearly 12,000 container units per ship call. And we've moved on average more than 200,000 units off the docks and into the American economy for 8 straight months. So the numbers and all that we talk about publicly about how this port's been running continue to shine.
Okay, Gene, you raised a good issue here. One of the good things is that the congestion really has dissipated. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. It's been interesting. We had a peak of 109 vessels at anchor back on January 9th. And while moving near record amounts of cargo for the first 8 months, we worked that backlog of ships down from 109 to 8 as of this morning. And those 8 ships that are waiting outside the twin ports are sitting for about 24 hours before they get their work orders to come in. So in effect, the backlog is gone. We're up to speed. And the ports are extremely fluid. Numbers moving off look good. The truck turn times are a lot better. And we're even seeing the dwell times look great on the truck side, 3.6 days, which is near where we were before this surge began. So I like where we're at right now.
Okay. However, there's been a lot of publicity about the fact that the Port of New York is posting itself as #1 in the last month, and that the Port of LA has gone down to the 3rd place. We have been here before, but there's been a lot of people saying, is this, and I think you've seen the publication today that suggested that this could be a permanent state of affairs where West Coast traffic moves substantially over to the east and the Gulf Coast. Gene, where do you think we are going to land at the end of the day?
Yeah, 1 month doesn't make a trend, Stas. So we'll let those guys have their parades and parties. We've been in the pole position now as the #1 port in North America for 22 consecutive years. I don't see that changing anytime soon, and there will be movement. In the month of August, as an example, we saw a pretty fair drop, about 15% of our cargo, and for three main reasons. One is that a lot of the retailers and others brought in cargo much earlier than normal to secure delivery dates, thinking that they needed to pad their transits and supply chains just a bit. We also saw about 10 to 12% of those boxes go to the East and Gulf Coast. Folks made those decisions early on. They were tired of congestion and backups, long time to get their cargo, and some hedged on the West Coast labor talks. And then thirdly, we had a local issue here at one of our terminals that caused some of the ships to go over to Long Beach, while the experts from the ILWU and the Employers Association got that fixed. That's also temporary. So, here we are crying in our beer, Stas, and we did 805,000 TEUs. That used to be a psychological high water mark before we got accustomed to all these crazy cartoon numbers over the last 2.5 years. But nonetheless, if you remember at the very beginning of this year, I talked about what we thought was going to happen in 2022. And the first thing that we discussed was a tapering of U.S. imports. This high roll effect of imports wasn't going to last forever. While many Americans who could and worked from home were buying goods, there were certain products that were not going to be repeat purchases. Think of the person working from home who bought a new refrigerator, a new sofa, new patio set. In my case, I bought a new set of golf clubs because the gym was closed down. Did not help my game at all. But with all these and other products, you're not going to buy them every year. You're not going to buy a fridge next year again. Right. So once those inventories got up to a safety stock level, you'd see that kind of taper off. And many of those, as you know, are big, bulky products, taking up a lot of containers and ship space.
Oh, Japanese ball shooting shuts down the I-15 near Victorville.
Hey, Arlie, could you mute, please? Thanks. That's one of my guys over here at the port. I think he's doing something really important. But getting back to where we're at, the American consumer continues to purchase. The September numbers will be out here shortly from the Department of Commerce and others. The August numbers were flat with July on the consumer purchasing side, which makes up about 70% of our economy. Those numbers continue to be pretty good. And the inflation numbers on the wholesale and producer sides remain elevated because we keep buying. Even in the face of the 8.3% inflation that we're facing, and that we're going out more. You go to restaurants, they're full. Get on airplanes, also at capacity. Ball games, the Dodgers are drawing real well, as are many others in Major League Baseball and sports in general. The NFL season, college season has just kicked off. We're hungry as Americans to get back out and do things, to see each other. So this boon was not going to last forever, yet with the ease of purchasing, the ability for us to buy online, curbside pickup, delivery, we're going to keep purchasing at elevated levels. Our bank accounts are still pretty high, $2.7 trillion in savings across the nation. And you've got a job market where it looks different than those inflationary numbers, right? You get the lowest unemployment levels since 1969. And you've still got 10.4 million jobs open nationwide. We're not immune in our sector, but you're still looking deep, wide, and far to bring folks into organizations in a variety of sectors across the U.S. economy. So this continues to be very interesting. I think where we have a real opportunity is to bolster U.S. exports that have waned now for 4 years because of trade policy, strength of the U.S. dollar, more recent phenomenon with a focus on imports and hustling those empty containers back to Asia. But as those imports start to taper a little bit, I think all of us would be pretty sharp if we went back and renewed our interest in that export market, especially with what's happening with the atrocities in Ukraine and America being counted on more and more to supply some of that which comes from our breadbasket.
And Gene, on that note, as you know, agricultural exporters have been very vociferous about problems that they've had the last couple of years. You just alluded to one of the problems, which was the deployment of empty containers. Are you feeling now that, and the dollar is high too, which is going to complicate things, but do you still see a potential for exports to rise?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you just a couple of examples. One, since the beginning of the year, we've been working with the International Dairy Foods Association. Michael Dykes is their CEO based in Washington. We've doubled dairy exports through the Port of Los Angeles since January. And through Michael's efforts, along with CMA, CGM, Ed Aldridge, and so many others, they've increased dairy exports by 50% from the United States this year alone. That's great. We've been working with the almond grower, the Almond Alliance, the walnut handlers, the Rice Coalition, the wine groups, and others here in California alone to really bolster. And our idea was pretty simple, Stas. We had about 500,000 container units that were being empty repositioned back to Asia every month from these two ports in Southern California. Said, look, all we got to do, let's carve out a piece of this and offer it to the exporters, those who could really turn the boxes fast, load up, get back to the port and get off. And we're starting to see that pick up steam. We've got to do a lot more. We got to help out with the specialty grains folks, the wheat people, and so many others in the Midwest, working very closely with the Ag TC and Peter Friedman, who's a friend of a lot of ours. So there's a real opportunity here, but it's been the age-old dilemma for our industry. How do you create those great round trip and triangulated economics of containers, truck, and rail to make sure that we can spin these exports back and keep this supply chain velocity high? Much more work to do, but I like where we stand right now with the level of focus and determination.
Gene, I was in Athens last week at the Propeller Club convention, and I talked to a Greek shipping executive who is in the bulk business. And he asked me why people are moving grains into containers and why they don't take advantage of the bulk ships that are a lot cheaper. And he didn't understand why there was this movement into containers. Could you explain why we are seeing more agricultural products going into containers?
Well, there are a variety of reasons, but number one, with the identity preserved products, we don't like to see a lot of motion or transloading or rehandling of those products because they bruise easily. Secondly, looking at direct shipments from the United States main ports to the receiving port where the customer is located in Asia is key to avoid those relay marks. At last study, I think we had some 34 different services out of here and along the West Coast that go directly to those customer-based ports overseas in the Asia Pacific trade. So a lot has to do with that, the convenience of having those containers offloaded from the import side, brought back, the great rail service that we offer in this country. It's not always cheaper per pound, per kilo going via bulk. I think the container guys and ladies have done a pretty good job of being competitive. And while it may not always be dollar for dollar, those other variables I just mentioned, plus many more, go into that equation when these guys and ladies are evaluating what type of service to use.
And would time be one of the advantages going by container?
Cycle of money, interest rates going up, the quicker you can get the product to your customer, the better you're going to be monetarily. Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay. Gene, there's a lot of concern being expressed about a slowdown in trade from Asia. And we've also had some dislocations in China related to COVID outbreaks in Sichuan province. There have been problems on the Yangtze River. They've had some of the same drought problems, and the river levels, as you know, have been going down. Are we going to start seeing a slowdown in trade next year?
It depends on what you think of a slowdown. I mean, folks ask this a lot. Economically, by definition of the academic area, 2 consecutive quarters of economic decline mean you're in a recession. Face it, that's it. Rising interest rates, a very active Federal Reserve that's going to be climbing over 4 percentage points. Folks that are getting nervous on the equity markets because the Fed is too hawkish, wondering if they're going too fast. Some of the same people just a couple of months ago said the Fed was slow to react. And oh my goodness, what's going to happen? There's not a day that goes by in our business, thanks to the journalism community, that the supply chain is not in the news, whether it's mainstream or folks like yourself who have been covering this business for a long time that know the details of the supply chain. There's a bump in the road every single day, and that spotlight has been on us for so long now, but it's never too bright. We've got to continue to be resilient. We've got to be able to scale. But as I said in the last stanza, this milestone series of months that we put together, I think we had record months for 28 or 29 consecutive months in a row. That's never happened in our history, and it wasn't going to continue on into infinity. So where we may see a couple of movements here and there, none of it is going to have this cargo volume fall off a cliff or be cataclysmic to us, but we'll have to adjust. And it'll be based on consumer demand, factory demand, and how we can ramp up these exports. But it's been interesting with the privilege of hindsight to go backwards. There were folks who had all of these ideas because it was just about port congestion. We've now come to understand this is a global phenomenon brought on by a 100-year pandemic that created all kinds of new and different behavior. The second piece was where we had folks that were opining on what would happen because of. The lockdowns in Shanghai were feared to be just a stop in trade and then an unbelievable and unmanageable deluge of import ships to the West Coast that we couldn't handle. Others had said after an early Lunar New Year, we were going to go right back up to 109 vessels at anchor. None of those came true. But it's because we continue to work together. And whether it be here domestically in the United States with these decades-long relationships we have overseas, we needed to start being able to see around corners and over hills and predict a little better, especially in our business, using digitalization, trying to make sure that we had the right ideas of what was happening and making sure that great appreciation was shown to that workforce. In our neck of the woods, the ILWU has been averaging 6 days a week on the job since the pandemic began in March of 20. Even before we knew how to protect ourselves and our families, these folks were out there working and pushing the cargo through. As we looked into the abyss in March with about half of the cargo volume that we had been accustomed to, suddenly the American consumer took off. And in the summer of 2020, that caravan of cargo just didn't stop. But it was the workforce, the truckers, the warehouse folks, the people in the manufacturing sector, of which we boast the largest number of manufacturing employees right here in LA County at more than 390,000 people. So everybody's rallied. And as we look at other phenomena that keep happening, we have shown to be resilient and that cargo volume keeps coming in. Retail sales are good. The manufacturers are pumping. If we get these automotive guys with the chip panels, nothing's going to stop them. Their forward-looking sales are off the charts. All we got to do is get that intelligence package into those cars. I was in Dearborn a couple of weeks ago. They got cars behind the Ford headquarters just stacked up waiting for those panels. So that to emphasize my point, whether it's a COVID lockdown, Yangtze River water levels, chip and component parts, there's a lot to take in the supply chain, even with these economic indicators that we've covered. We're going to continue to push through.
Okay. Gene, one of the areas that you and I have talked about for years, and it has bumped back up again, is that the rail dwell time, as you know, reported by PMSA, and I see Jessica here, was reported at 16.5 days last month. Why is this continuing to be so high? And what's your forward projection on this?
That's been brought to my attention, but we've been monitoring all these numbers for a long time. And it's been done through the Port Optimizer with direct feeds from just about everybody in the supply chain. And as of this morning here in Los Angeles, we stand at 7.2 days dwell time. And that's been slowly declining over the last 3-4 weeks. We reached a peak of 13.4 days last year, end of summer, beginning of fall. And in normal time, Stas, that dwell time is about 2 days. And what's happened is now, again, with the benefit of history, fairly explainable. Today, the inland rail terminals look a lot like our ports did last year. They're filled to the gills with containers. The Western railroads, who I would never speak for, but who have shared with me that they've begun stacking containers as opposed to running purely wheeled operations because of this deluge of cargo. Rail volume coming over the port of Los Angeles has increased sixfold since the month of February. And it's been a challenge to keep up with that velocity because if one node slows down, the rest of it backs up to the port. If we can get cargo off those rail facilities, and I'm talking for people who are in this space, Joliet, West Memphis, Marion, Memphis, Alliance, DIT, some of the major hubs, including Kansas City as a tertiary market, pretty full. We got to get that cargo off so we can build the next train and bring it in. Now, there's always the displacement of assets. Crewing and engine power have been talked about a lot, but it really begins and ends with the velocity of the cargo moving from node to node. And I can assure you it's had the attention from the highest levels in Washington and Sacramento to our private sector partners. This work has been daily and around the clock to see how we could just wiggle any more efficiency possible. Now, I will tell you on the rail side that over the past 5.5, now almost 6 weeks, we've seen a decline of 25 to 30% of idling rail cargo at the Port of Los Angeles. And the segment that we look at most closely, that aging cargo 9 days and older, is down by 35% for one carrier and more than 25% for another. So we're starting to see that momentum pick up and real numbers dropping, getting more of that cargo into the interior. Much more work ahead of us, but very pleased with what I've seen in recent days and weeks.
Well, that's very helpful because you've provided us with more up-to-date information, and that certainly is a positive development. Gene, my next question has to do with something you already referenced, which is the port optimizer. And I have a follow-up question on digital in just a second, but I'd like you to discuss the importance of the port optimizer and how it's helped during the supply chain crisis.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And we go back to the early days of COVID. And then as the surge started to take shape, it's also important to be mindful of the fact, again, if you take a second and take stock of what we've witnessed, everybody likes to talk, including me, about this big import surge, and it's been 2 3/4 years, and everybody's buying online and buying more stuff than ever. But we've seen probably 8 to 10 micro trends along that same timeline. So we've had to anticipate better, figure things out quicker. Sometimes if we fail forward and keep pushing. I'll give you a great example, right? Last October, when people were just screaming from the mountaintops that they couldn't get cargo out of the port of LA, we made a big push. We got a lot of cargo out into the domestic economy. We threatened to fine people, never collected a dollar. We got record sales for both the full year and the holiday season for American retailers. And then suddenly, as everybody came back from the New Year holiday, there was more kicking and screaming because we had so many empties. Now, what did you think was going to happen? We pushed out more imports than ever before. We have a paucity of exports because of trade policy, retaliatory tariffs, and the strength of the US dollar. We were going to get a lot of empties back. So we acted really quickly. I give great credit to Mike DiBernardo and Eric Harris and all the other guys around here that we started to open up flex property and near dockyards, property that was managed by the port, but near to the marine terminals, so we can capture this deluge of empties and not have the truckers get frustrated because they couldn't drop them off at marine terminals. So all of this was brought about because of the data. We were able to see trends. We now see cargo coming in 40 days before it lands. We're able to look at this aging cargo. We're able to segment products better and not just point fingers. We've refrained from that the entire time. But what we've tried to do is, if you don't need your cargo now, we're just going to separate it out. And what's lost on some discussions is that while a lot of people talk about retail on the import side, more than retail, manufacturing parts and components make up a bigger share than finished retail goods here at the Port of Los Angeles. And by and large, those folks aren't ordering just in case. They're ordering just in time to get those parts and components to the factory floor levels. We're able to dissect that through the data as well. So we got a long way to go. There's much more to learn, but I do feel like we're so much smarter than we were a year ago. We have better anticipatory skills than we had demonstrated before. And it's about bringing a community together to get the job done and not point fingers at who's to blame and what lobbyist needs to go campaign for additional legislation.
Okay. And my follow-up question is, as you know, Federal Maritime Commissioner Benzel has been promoting the Maritime Transportation Data Initiative to create an industry-wide data sharing. Is that an idea whose time has come?
Oh, 1,000%. And we're decades behind other trading nations. Dacosi in Germany, Nexport in Belgium, Calista in Singapore, just to name a few, have been around for decades. These are port and information sharing systems that allow people to start seeing what the traffic's going to look like and how to prepare land, machinery, skilled labor to handle it. We don't. We've been fearful that data could be sold, that it would be shared with competitors, or God forbid, if a rising tide lifts all boats, my company might lose a competitive advantage to companies that don't have the same access I do. Why not improve the supply chain? And we've gotten through all those myths. We went out and created a system that was designed by industry for industry. We did all the focus groups and roundtables, bought coffee and donuts for everybody. Tell us what you need. It's interoperable. I don't care whose system it is. Often imitated, never replicated. You can plug in, we can talk to each other, but folks are still not heeding the call. And therefore, I really credit Commissioner Benzel and what he's got. I met with him during IANA a couple of weeks ago. What he's got is a really good framework that puts accountability into the marketplace, whether you're a public sector operation like us or private sector firms. And his call to action is simply that: communicate, share this data so we can get better every day. We've seen the impact of a bad supply chain on the American economy. Let's get to a place where it helps support that growth.
Very good. Gene, harbor truckers have expressed a lot of concern about the clean truck mandates that are due to go into effect next year. They're worried that they are not going to be able to qualify. We've heard predictions privately from people that a lot of trucks are just not going to show up at the ports. What is your take on this? And is there a solution to the problem that these truckers are facing?
Yeah, this has been another elusive part of our business for some time now. And you got two real big issues that are on top of us at this moment. One is Assembly Bill number 5. It's been known as the gig workers bill, but it impacts all who are contractors, independent contractors, with an attempt or a focus to create permanent employee status for those folks. In some cases, it's gone over really well in certain sectors. In others, as we've seen, folks want to maintain their independence. And it's an individual decision in specific parts of industry and commerce. It's not a one-size-fits-all, unfortunately, and we're learning that. We saw the disruption that took place at the Port of Oakland with protests. And, that's not the way we want to do things. But like we did here in Los Angeles, those truckers who wanted to speak out had a voice. They had a space to air their concerns and issues without any disruption to the business flow here. So that's one piece, and we don't know how it's going to land. It's what I do know is it's going to cost a trucker individually a lot more money to do business in the state of California from a licensing perspective than it has before. The second issue is around the new CARB rule that's going to eliminate 2010 engine model years and older. And we've got accounts all over the board and numbers that are flying left and right, but it's probably somewhere between 20 and 25% of the registered trucks here in the Southern California ports. So, and it moves around a little bit, Stas, but you probably have about 20,000 trucks registered. About half of those trucks do regular business here. And the percentage of those older trucks has been depleting over time, but it's going to impact somebody. And it's going to impact somebody putting dinner on the table at night. So we've got to find a way to get these folks in the older trucks into more modern trucks that are cleaner. And it continues to be a very polarizing discussion. What we've got to do with our ambition of being a zero emissions heavy duty truck port is focus all of our energy and time on accelerating the technology and making it commercially affordable. About 45% of all the truckers that do business here in the Southern California ports are classified as small business, 5 rigs or less. On average, a diesel truck that they buy, not on the secondary, but on the tertiary market, cost about $50,000. A low NOx truck that has been a loser all along because of the regulatory authorities' zeal to get to zero emissions cost about $225,000. A zero emissions battery electric truck can be anywhere between $350,000 and $450,000, with probably in-kind investment for charging and infrastructure. The hydrogen fuel cell truck, which has a longer duty cycle, better torque, and can be filled up in 20 minutes, is a lot more than that in its prototype status. So how do you get this small business person into one of these newer, cleaner trucks? Some say grants. Yeah, sure. We can put up grant money. We'll continue to do so. We'll use the clean truck fee money to help bridge that gap. But even with a grant that we give to a trucker, they still have to pay income tax on that dollar value. Even with the grant, they have to pay the federal excise tax on the full sticker price of that rig. There's no way we ever get these guys and ladies whole. So we've got to figure out a better plan. And you might remember, dating back to 2006, when the ports put in their first clean truck program, we wiped out 30% of the truckers in this industry because it became too expensive to keep running those rigs. We can't afford that today. The money that's there cannot be on the backs of these truckers. We cannot leave the workforce behind. We got to find a better way. And that's where the effort should be. Not finger pointing, not litigating, and not relitigating other areas. We got to get to the business of accelerating the technology and making it available to all. Stas, I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
The Clean Air Action Plan. You have some mandates on harbor cargo moving equipment. And do you believe that you're going to reach your goal of I think it's 2030 for the equipment?
Yeah, we have to, but we've got so much more work to do. You know, climate change is the greatest existential threat that we face. Food security is right there with it, and prosperity for being able to handle the situations we're in right now across the board with respect to safety, as we've talked about with Ukraine, Russia, and other areas. But with this, we have got to really hustle, Stas. You know, the key is that we're testing right now about 200 pieces of equipment, whether they be on the container yards or the heavy duty trucks, and we've got 25,000 pieces, right? If you look at the total units, we've got to get these well-capitalized national and global brands in the game. The day of building something on top of a garage with a student that was at the university are over. Great ideas. Everybody is still welcome, but we're talking about a real leap to the future that cannot be done without the proper financial framework and the great knowledge of engineers and scientists to take us there. The other problem, Stas, quite honestly, is because ports are treated differently. You got the FAA for the airports, right? You've got an entire litany of agencies that govern industry across the nation from a federal standpoint. We don't. If you've seen one port, you've seen one port, and that's because there is no broad, stringent framework for regulation. Why not have a nationwide standard for emissions, the use of equipment in heavy duty trucks? We've got ports around the country that are saying, okay, watch what LA and Long Beach do, watch what Oakland's going to have to do, and bring your older trucks to us. Now, in the end, that's not going to do anything for climate change, sea level rise, or the health of impacted communities and underserved neighborhoods. We got to find a way to do this on a national level that's better. That can move the needle, because as many people have told me, well, you're the biggest port in the country, you can really drive this. In the heavy duty truck market, we still represent less than 2.5 weeks worth of annual North American production. And by state law, Senate Bill number 1, private sector industry doesn't have to buy their trucks but once every 13 years. You've got issues of being able to insure these trucks, drive the decisions on infrastructure, and remain technology neutral. If I make a bet on one technology and I'm wrong, there goes all that infrastructure capability, and it has to be redone. So we've got a lot ahead of us. I like our chances because we're a pretty tenacious bunch, private and public sector both. But the conversation has to be fact-based. And while it's not very popular, public transit and passenger cars look very different than this industrial setting. This port is made as a transit facility. It is not going to be a massive charging station for battery electric vehicles. And on that note, you're either going to haul a battery or you're going to haul cargo today, because you can't do both based on the weight requirements across the state of California. So we got a lot of work to do. Encouraged by some of these great companies that are out here right now, Volvo and Mack and Peterbilt, along with Toyota and so many others, the Kalmar guys, the Taylor folks on the yard equipment. There's still much more work to do. We've got to get there.
Very good. Gene, one last quick question. I know that you and the Port of LA and the Port of Shanghai have been involved in a collaboration on a green ship corridor. Could you tell us how that's going?
Yeah, so far, really well. This was part of Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti's plan when he was the chair of the C40 group of cities. And we put together a coalition of experts around this industry to create that green shipping corridor with the Shanghai International Port Group, Shanghai Municipal Port, Port of Los Angeles, and then shipping lines, Maersk, MSC, CMA, and the O&E. And there'll be more to come, more are being added every day. And the idea is this: take one container from its origin point in Asia, Shanghai metropolitan area or beyond, bring it all the way to Los Angeles and deliver it to its final destination in a zero emission green way. And that means all of us have got to get to that point where we're able to use our node in a zero carbon manner. So I like where we stand. And while China and the US politically can't agree on too much today, we sure are doing good work in our space of supply chain. Eugene, who runs the Shanghai International Port Group and the Yangshan Deep Sea Port, has been doing amazing work through adverse circumstances during the entire COVID-19 episode. And yet he still has the foresight and the vision to join us in this green corridor. That'll inspire many to come along with us.
Okay. Well, Gene, you have been an inspiration to us. You have been an inspiration during this whole COVID crisis, the supply chain crisis, and you have been the go-to guy that has spoken out about a lot of the issues and challenges that our longshoremen, our stevedores, our truckers, our railroads have faced. And I, for one, want to thank you very much for all of your good work. Your monthly press briefings have been a real clinic for everybody. And I think you've done a lot to educate the media about things that they did not know as much about before this came along. So I want to thank you very much. And David, I guess I'll turn it back over to you to open up for questions.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Gene and Stas. Yeah, we can open it up to questions. If you have a question you'd like, you can type it in the chat or please unmute and go ahead and ask away.
Yeah, Gene, we got cut off a little earlier in the breakout, but wanted to follow up. We've talked a little bit about it during the discussion with you and Stas on the Ukraine. And I know that Secretary Vilsack and the Ag Department is continuing to try to figure out what it all will mean if, in fact, we have another winter where we have little to no grain being exported out of Ukraine and into the other parts of the world. So just trying to get from your perspective what that could mean here and how that differentiates with past years.
Yeah, Mark, thanks for the question. And we highlighted at the beginning of the year that we were going to watch three things really closely because they would be impacting us far overseas as well as right here at home. The flow of energy products, and that's been in the news every day, whether it's natural gas, oil, OPEC, Russian reserves, and how that's contributing to the bleak outlook for the winter in European homes. Second is that flow of the products on the ag side, right? Same kind of a concept. We count so much on both of those countries in the EU for the distribution of wheat and other ag products that it's going to be very difficult. But it's an answer that possibly could from the United States farmers and ramp up production. Again, it's been really interesting to watch and spending time with the specialty grains folks, the folks in wheat, and some of the other subsectors on how much is made to be grown, harvested to be consumed here, and what is available for the overseas markets. And being able to pivot where we have retaliatory tariffs and some barriers into areas that really need us is right there in the offing. Secretary has been super engaged with us on dairy products and some of the work that we've been doing here. State Secretary of Agriculture, Karen Ross, has been a true champion here in the state of California and one that we consider a friend to help us bring parties together. So there's a lot of work there. The third thing that I was watching, Mark, is the cyber threatscape, and it continues to be real. We're now stopping at the Port of Los Angeles, stopping 40 million cyber intrusion attempts per month. And that's double what it was pre-COVID, and it's on the rise since the invasion of Ukraine. So much so that it gave us the ability to put together a cyber resilience center, one of the first of its kind in the world, to bring together our private sector partners. And the ILWU was a charter member from the organized labor side to make sure that we've got all eyes on this, experts on the ground and different vantage points. And the key to this is that while they follow protocol here at the federal level, safety and security, it's done under a cloak of anonymity. We don't want to hurt anyone's brand, anyone's reputation if they fall ill to these punitive actions by nation states. But if you see something happening, say something. The port can synthesize it along with co-creator IBM in faster time than ever and get the word out to those other 44 members of this coalition so they can be on the lookout. So these are three pieces that we're watching very closely and trying to work with and around on every chance. And the secretaries that I mentioned, both at the federal and the state level, have been with us every step of the way.
Thanks for your question, especially your transparency on that third aspect, which I think we all are hoping will be as good of it as it can be for the future.
Thanks, Mark. Good seeing you.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Anybody else?
Gene, John Simon here. If the political situation in the Taiwan Strait significantly changes, what do you perceive could be the impact on the San Pedro Bay ports?
Yeah, good question. It's tough to deal in hypotheticals, John, but it's been in the news so much and there's been a lot of political tension. Trying not to comment on other people's domestic and international policies that are their own. Taiwan has two great liner shipping companies that call our port in Evergreen and Yangming. They make their bacon in China and in Southeast Asia. Taiwan has migrated over time into a real home base for the manufacturer of those silicon chips, as we talked about earlier, as U.S. companies tried to offshore those. I don't see the super big impact of large containerized cargo if something changes in Taiwan, because that cargo has long been outside of the island nation. So, again, there's a lot here. There's a lot of layers. There are a lot of layers and complexity to it. But from a sheer volume perspective, Well, Taiwan's trading value is important because of a whole plethora of commodities. It's not so much solely geared or monolithic in the large container space today.
Great.
Thanks, John.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, well, we're coming up to the close of the hour, so it's good that we, I guess, close the event. But again, thank you, Gene and Stas. You know, it's just so nice to have you both on today, and I think everybody would agree that it was a great discussion. And I want to go back and thank our gold sponsors for today's event, the Harbor Industrial Services Corp. And Ports America. And thank you all for being with us today and listening to this discussion. Hope you enjoyed it. And remember our future programs. They are some really good programs, especially we want to encourage everyone to come to the annual seafood feast on October 20th. And again, more information about becoming a sponsor or to these events, please visit our website. So with that, I want to thank you again and wish everybody to stay safe, be well, and have a great day. So we'll talk to you later. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.